Before dawn, Rhett found crows tearing at a scorched stump. He rode closer. An Apache girl hung upside down from a tree, her body broken, her breath fading. He cut her down. She whispered one name through the blood, Cain. Rhett knew that name, the land baron who'd killed without mercy. And now her pursuers were coming. Rhett had lived alone for 10 years. But the moment he carried that girl home, his loneliness ended and the war began. If this story stirred something in you, let me know in the comments. And subscribe, because the West has more tales to tell the Seni. That day, before the sun had even cleared the ridge, Rhett spotted a flock of crows gathered on a scorched cypress stump, their wings thrashing like they'd just torn into something dead. He spurred his horse closer. An Apache girl was hanging upside down from a tree branch, her body swaying like a broken doll. Her hair hung loose and tangled, her clothes torn down to scraps, barely clinging to her skin. Dark purple bruises spread across her body. Her head drooped toward the ground, and her breathing came faint and shallow. Rhett dismounted and cut the rope with his hunting knife. Her body collapsed into his arms, heavy from too much blood pooling in her head. Her hand trembled, clutching at his shirt like someone drowning and reaching for air. Her eyes opened just a crack deep, black and full of fear. She whispered, barely more than a breath, "Cain killed them all." Rhett looked around. No horse tracks, only wind and cruelty lingering in the trees. He lifted the girl into his arms and turned his horse toward home. He knew one thing for certain from this moment on: his loneliness was over. Rhett Lawson carried the Apache girl across the front yard and into the old wooden cabin where he'd lived alone for nearly a decade. The early wind blew hard, sweeping in pale yellow dust, as if trying to erase every trace of the massacre that still hung in the air. He laid her down on a long oak table and quickly lit an oil lamp. The dim yellow glow revealed deep bruises on her chest, shoulders, and back. Whip marks twisted across her skin, like the roots of a dead tree, wounds that only come from being beaten for hours. Rhett didn't ask anything right away. He let her breathe. He placed a warm cloth on her forehead and checked her pulse. The heartbeat was faint, but it was there. "Keep breathing, girl," he said softly, his calloused hand wiping dust from her cheek. She opened her eyes again, eyes of someone who had seen something unspeakable. Her spirit was more bruised than her body. "Naelli," she whispered. Rhett nodded. "I'm Rhett Lawson. You're safe here." But she weakly shook her head. "No. Nowhere is safe if Cain is still alive." Rhett froze. That name wasn't unfamiliar. Barrett Cain, the cold-blooded land baron who'd taken over the South. The same man who'd killed 2 Mexican men just to send a message to the townsfolk. The man everyone in Cedar Hollow avoided like the plague. "What happened to you?" Rhett asked. Naelli tried to lift her head, but it dropped again. She took a sharp, pained breath. "Cain wanted our tribe's land," she whispered, "but the elder refused to sell. We found silver, a lot of it, more than you can imagine. They wanted to take everything." Tears spilled from the corners of her eyes, not from weakness, but from seeing things no one should ever see. "They killed everyone," Naelli continued, her voice breaking like it was being strangled by the wind. "The old, the young, my mother." She gripped Rhett's hand, the tremor in her body spreading into his arm. "They captured me. They beat me. They hung me up to make me talk, to tell them where the silver was. I escaped, but she didn't need to finish." Rhett already knew. She'd fled here in pure desperation, collapsing at his fence, like a soul clinging to its last sliver of hope. He stood up, pulled back the rug in the center of the cabin, and opened a wooden hatch. Below was a hidden cellar he'd built back in his mining days, a place once used to store dynamite, now turned into a final refuge for a hunted girl. Rhett carried Naelli down and laid her on the old mattress, pulling a blanket over her. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Rhett paused, his weathered face softening. "Because I was left behind once," he said, "and I swore I'd never let that happen in front of me again." Above the wooden floor, the sound of distant hoofbeats echoed a sound. Rhett recognized instantly. Her pursuers had found their way here. At first, the sound of hoofbeats was distant, but within minutes, it grew heavy and clear. Rhett Lawson stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the old wooden table where a smear of Naelli's dried blood still remained. The oil lamp flickered slightly, casting long trembling shadows on the walls. Down in the cellar, she was breathing hard, each breath like a fragile thread stretched between life and death. Rhett pulled back the curtain. 3 strangers on horseback rode into the front yard. They weren't wanderers. These were Barrett Cain's men. The one in front wore a black hat and a road-dusted cloak. A gleaming Colt hung at his side. He scanned Rhett's yard like a wolf, sniffing out the scent of blood. Rhett opened the door and stepped onto the porch, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the ground. The man in the black hat curled his lip. "Mr. Lawson," he said, his voice tight like a rope being pulled taut. "Someone passed through your land. An Apache girl. Badly hurt. You see anything?" Rhett looked him dead in the eye. "No." A simple answer. But the man only smirked slowly. "Funny thing, there are drag marks outside the fence. And blood. Plenty of it." He bent down and picked up a scrap of torn fabric caught on his boot. "Looks like it came off an Apache doeskin skirt." The 2 men behind him dismounted and started circling the house, sniffing around like hounds. Rhett didn't move. "You're standing on my land," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the wind. "I don't permit searches." The man in the hat tilted his head. "You think the 3 of us need your permission?" Rhett said nothing. He only shifted his stance slightly, positioning himself to block part of the doorway. Below the floorboards, in the dark of the hidden cellar, Naelli was no doubt hearing every word. One of the men stepped over to the well and leaned down, eyeing a reddish stain in the standing water. "Royce," he called out, "we got blood over here." The man in the black hat, Royce, nodded, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of a sure lead. "Mr. Lawson," Royce said, placing a hand on the grip of his pistol, "I'll ask one last time. Where is she?" Rhett stared at him for so long the air between them seemed to thicken. Then he said, "There's no one here but me, and the Winchester I keep inside." The man near the stables let out a crude laugh. "You really think you can take all of us?" "Oldman," Rhett answered with a look that froze the laugh right where it stood. The air grew so tense, even the wind held its breath. Royce tugged down his hat and took one step up the porch. Just one step. But enough for Rhett to know this confrontation was unavoidable. In his hands, all the years of solitude, every loss, and the dim, desperate look in Naelli's eyes came together into one single choice. If they found the girl, no one would be leaving this place alive. Royce had only taken half a step further onto the porch when Rhett Lawson sensed the shift in the wind, that strange, heavy silence that only men who'd lived their whole lives on dry, cracked land would recognize. The silence that comes just before the gunfire. The man near the stables tilted his chin and let his fingers rest on the trigger of his Colt. "Let's start the search." Rhett said nothing. He stepped back just for a moment. And that motion was all it took for Royce to mistake his intent. Royce fired first. The bullet screamed through the still morning air, shattering the silence. Rhett turned his shoulder just enough, and the shot slammed into the wooden post behind him. He'd been waiting for this. Rhett drew his Colt like lightning and fired a single shot, clean through Royce's left chest. The man flew backward off the porch. His hat spun to the ground, and blood pooled quickly beneath the pale morning sun. The other two shouted and split up. One rolled behind the water trough. The other dashed toward the fence line for higher ground. Rhett kicked the door shut, slammed the wooden bolt into place, and crouched low. "Stay down there. Don't come up." He called into the dark cellar where Naelli was hiding. A weak breath answered, but it was full of trust. Outside, boots pounded the dry dirt in steady, loud thumps. The one by the fence fired through the door, splintering it into fragments. Rhett caught a glimpse of his movement through the window. Another bullet smashed into the kitchen, shattering a ceramic jug. Rhett inhaled slowly. His blood ran hot through the veins in his arms. He wasn't young anymore, but he was still just as accurate as the day he'd stood in a canyon exchanging fire with mine raiders. He cracked the window open and leaned out for less than half a second. Bung! The man behind the water trough took a bullet straight through the throat. He dropped, choking, hearing only the wind inside his own neck. The last one shouted, "You said the old man was finished." He ran behind the barn, looking for better cover. Rhett tracked his shadow, then calmly walked to the cupboard beside the stove. He opened it and pulled out a dark wooden box. Inside were 3 old mining sticks of dynamite, powerful enough to tear through solid rock. And now, to end this pursuit, Rhett lit the fuse, counted the beats in his head, and hurled it toward the barn right where he knew the last man was catching his breath. There was one heartbeat of silence. Boom! Dirt and wood exploded like rain. The corner of the barn shook violently, splinters flying in every direction. The thug was flung into the open, landing like a ragged sack, half his body scorched, still breathing, but unable to rise. Rhett stepped onto the porch, gun still in hand. The golden light lit up his face, covered in dust and sweat. The wounded man looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "Please, merci." Rhett didn't answer. He looked at him the way you might look at a piece of grass. "You hung a girl up and thought I'd spare you." He pulled the trigger. Silence returned to the prairie. Rhett stood there, his breathing growing heavier. He knew the one who got away would tell Barrett Cain. And from this point forward, the real war had begun. Thank you for being here. If this story brought back memories of the old days, those red, dusty afternoons, the sound of hoofbeats echoing in your chest, then subscribe to my channel so every day we can sit together once more. And I'll tell you another story. From the west, smoke from the explosion still lingered, curling into thin ribbons in the early sunlight. The smell of gunpowder mixed with scorched wood, coating the entire front yard like a warning that death had just passed through. Rhett Lawson stood still for a long time after the final shot. His gun was still hot. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the knowledge that what came next would be far more dangerous than all these henchmen combined. The one who got away was running, and he'd tell Barrett Cain everything. Rhett looked at the 3 bodies scattered across the yard. The wind tugged at their coats, making them flap like ghosts. 10 years of solitude had never been shattered like this. He turned back into the house. The kitchen was darker now. The sun had shifted, shining from another angle. Rhett pulled back the rug and opened the cellar hatch. In the darkness, Naelli's deep, well-like eyes opened. "Where are they?" she asked weakly. "3 dead." Rhett answered. "One ran." At the word ran, Naelli bolted upright by instinct. But the pain from her injuries hit hard. Choking her breath, she clutched her side, her face tightening in agony. "You have to leave," she gasped. "Right now. If he tells Cain you'll die, they'll come. 10 men. 20. Maybe an entire crew." Rhett looked at the young woman wrapped in an old blanket. Even after being beaten, hung upside down, her body wrecked, Naelli still held a strange kind of beauty, the beauty of a strength that had been pushed to the edge of death. She continued to plead, her voice cracking. "Please, don't go to the law. Don't report this. In Cedar Hollow, they all take Cain's money. They'll hand you over. They'll kill both of us." Rhett knew she was right. Completely right. He'd lived long enough in this land to know that the law was just a thin thread. While men like Barrett Cain were the axe, Naelli reached out, gripping Rhett's wrist, her hands shaking but full of desperate strength. "You saved me. Please, don't throw your life away for me." In that moment, Rhett saw in her eyes not just fear for herself, but fear for him, a man she'd barely known, but had placed her life in. Rhett sat beside her, gripped her shoulder, his voice low and steady. "I've lived like a dead man for 10 years. The day I let someone else die in front of me, I stopped being myself." He stood, light from the window cutting across his dust-covered face. "I'm not running anymore." "Naelli." She shook her head, tears falling more from pain than fear. "You'll die on the way to town. If not by Cain's hand, then by the hand of the law." Rhett grabbed his leather coat and opened the door. If death is the price of doing what's right, he put on his hat, tightened his gun belt. "Then I'll pay it." He stepped into the yard, led his horse forward, and tied one of the outlaw's bodies across its back. Naelli crawled to the top step, screaming in despair. "Rhett, don't go." He didn't turn around. He only said, "You being alive is enough." The old horse carried him off, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the wind. Naelli clutched her side and collapsed on the porch floor. For the first time in her life, she was afraid for the life of a man who didn't belong to her tribe. The road to Cedar Hollow was 12 miles long, but to Rhett Lawson, it felt like a ride straight into a blade. The sun was fully up now, casting harsh golden light onto the back of his old horse, whose breath came in labored bursts behind the saddle. The outlaw's body swayed with every step, an undeniable piece of evidence from the slaughter he'd left behind. The desert wind carried the scent of ash and dry earth. No birds, only the steady sound of hoofbeats, like the heartbeat of someone bracing for the worst. As Rhett entered the town, people stared with weary eyes. Some stepped off the road. Others whispered to each other when they saw the corpse tied to the back of his horse. The air in Cedar Hollow was already heavy. Today, it was thick, like the smell of old oil in a gun that hadn't been cleaned for years. Rhett stopped his horse in front of the sheriff's office. The wooden sign above the porch creaked with every gust of wind. He dismounted and yanked the corpse off the saddle, letting it thud to the dirt. The door creaked open. Sheriff Eldon stepped out, a heavy-set man, with a face red as fired brick. Gray stubble on his chin. His eyes narrowed when he saw Rhett. "What's this about?" "Lawson," he asked, his voice devoid of concern. Rhett nudged the corpse toward him with his boot. "Barrett Cain's men," Rhett said. "3 of them, and this one attacked my home. I defended myself." The sheriff stared at the body for a few seconds. He didn't bend down. He didn't ask a single question. He just crossed his arms. "And why bring this corpse into town? To report a crime?" Rhett said, "They beat and hung an Apache girl upside down. She survived and is hiding at my place. I'm here to give a statement and demand an investigation." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The small crowd around the office stepped back. A few frowned. Sheriff Eldon glanced around, then stepped off the porch, locking eyes with Rhett. "The law in Cedar Hollow doesn't concern itself with Apache trouble." Rhett clenched his jaw. "This isn't Apache trouble anymore. This is murder." The sheriff chuckled, a sound like steel, grinding steel. "Rhett, you've been off on your own too long. You think dragging one of Cain's boys into town means we're going to lock him up?" Another voice came from inside the jailhouse. "That's right. Lawson, you're poking at the most powerful man in this region." Marshal Benton, federal badge pinned to his coat, stood in the shadows. Sunlight caught the silver star, but Rhett could see it clearly. That badge didn't shine for justice. "Mr. Lawson," Benton said, "best thing you can do is forget it. If Cain wants that Apache girl dead, then maybe she deserves to die." The front yard of the sheriff's office went silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your ribs. Rhett placed both hands on the desk, leaned in until his face was inches from the 2 most powerful men in Cedar Hollow. "If the law here will do nothing," he said slowly, each word like a nail driven into wood, "then I'll go higher." Marshal Benton gave a short laugh. "To where Washington, the feds. No one's going to believe a lonely old man." "Lawson." Rhett tightened his grip on his gun belt. His voice was low. "They will when I bring enough proof." Sheriff Eldon stepped closer, eyes colder than steel. "Then I suggest you leave town before something unfortunate happens to you." Rhett looked at them both, no fear in his eyes. Then he turned, dragged the corpse back to his horse, and tied it up once more. The whole town watched him leave. No one said a word. The desert wind kicked up red dust behind him, as if escorting a man down a road that not many had the courage to walk. Rhett Lawson left Cedar Hollow in a silence so heavy it felt like iron in the air, not the silence of justice, but the silence of fear. No one in town dared voice support. No one held his gaze for long, because everyone knew crossing Barrett Cain was the same as digging your own grave. The old horse moved at a slow, weary pace down the road home. The sun was high, pouring heat onto the dirt like blades of fire. Rhett could feel every bone in his body aching with exhaustion, but his mind had never been clearer. He stopped at a ridge half a mile from his house. Thin smoke was curling into the sky from the direction of the farm. Not thick smoke, not the kind that came from burning a house. This was thin smoke, the kind from boiling water or burning wet grass, which could only mean one thing. Naelli had made it out of the cellar, or someone had made it in. Rhett spurred the horse harder. Even though the animal was spent, his chest tightened. Cold as well water at noon. As he reached the gate, the wind blowing through the front yard whispered like a warning. The door was cracked open. No voices, no boot tracks, but instinct told him something had happened. He drew his gun and stepped inside. The kitchen was empty. The oil lamp on the table still burned, the wick long and blackened. The rug covering the cellar hatch had been pushed aside. Rhett dropped to one knee and pulled it open. Naelli looked up at him, breathing hard, her eyes red. "You came back," she said, her voice like someone who'd just escaped a storm. Rhett reached down and pulled her up, steadying that thin but fierce body. In that moment, he could feel her holding herself together by sheer will. "Did anyone come?" Rhett asked. She nodded. 5 men, marked with Cain's sign. They searched around the house, but never came in. They just stood at the door and burned something. Rhett frowned, looking toward the last trails of smoke still hanging in the air. "Burned what?" Naelli swallowed hard. "Cloths with symbols, like warning signs, like marking a hunting ground." Rhett's heart sank. He understood now. Cain didn't need to enter the house. He only needed to mark it to say one thing: "I know you're hiding her. Wait for me." Naelli trembled with fear, but still stood upright. "They'll come back with more men. You should leave me and run. There's still time." Rhett looked at her for a long moment, the late afternoon sun catching the bruises on her cheek. A girl who'd been beaten, hunted, and still thought about his safety. "I've lived alone for 10 years. Rhett said. "I've been running for too long. I'm done running." Naelli opened her mouth to protest, but Rhett placed a hand gently on her shoulder, stopping her. What men like Cain fear the most isn't being exposed. It's someone who dares to stand against them. He stepped out into the yard, looking down the trail where the smoke still drifted, like ghosts of the men who'd come tonight. "Cain will send more than 5. Rhett said. "Maybe a whole crew." Naelli clutched her blanket tighter. "Then what do we do?" Rhett reached for the old Winchester hanging on the wall. He loaded it 1 bullet at a time, the dry click of metal echoing like hammers of fate. "We get ready," Rhett said, "because tonight, hell is coming to this place." As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, its last golden light faded like a candle being snuffed out, and Rhett Lawson's ranch fell into a darkness as heavy as a forgotten soul. The desert wind changed direction, blowing harder, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and a quiet dread that words couldn't capture. Rhett slammed the barn door shut, checking the locks and chains one last time. His movements were slow but sure, no wasted effort. He'd prepared for violence before, but never for a night like this. Inside the house, Naelli tried to stand upright, her hands trembling, but her eyes bright. She was still weak, but refused to rest. She wanted to help, even if only to stack boxes of ammunition or stoke the fire. "You should leave," she said for the 3rd time that evening, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of the final drop before a storm breaks. Rhett didn't answer. He was busy fastening another wooden crossbar over the window. Then he knelt down to check the rug covering the cellar entrance. "Tonight, you stay down here," he said in a tone that allowed no argument. Naelli stepped forward, placing her hand on his arm. "You can't fight Cain, not alone." Rhett stood and looked directly into those deep black eyes, eyes that had watched her tribe be erased, yet still burned with the fire of survival. 10 years ago, Rhett said slowly, "I let my wife die because I believed I wasn't strong enough to save her. Since that day, I've lived like a ghost." He turned away and began rearranging the ammunition boxes on the table. "Tonight," he continued, "even if I die, I won't make that mistake again." Naelli bit her lip, tears falling silently. She knew she couldn't change this man's mind. She also understood his resolve didn't come from duty, but from old pain and a need to protect her. Outside, the wind shifted into a low howl, like someone calling from beyond the horizon. In the distance, a flickering flame appeared. Then a second, Rhett stepped onto the porch, squinting into the darkness. Down the trail, he saw small lights moving steadily, like the breath of some great beast drawing closer. "They're earlier than I thought," he said quietly. Naelli followed, leaning against the wooden door frame. "How many?" she asked. Rhett listened to the horses, the burning torches. Finally, he answered, "At least 8, maybe 10. Naelli shivered, but didn't retreat. "You can't." Rhett lifted the Winchester onto his shoulder. "You go into the cellar." Naelli grabbed his sleeve, voice breaking. "If you die, I do too." Rhett paused. In the dark, he could see only her eyes, black, deep, and full of everything he hadn't dared to feel in 10 years. He placed his rough hand over hers. "No," he said gently. "You live, so you can tell the world there was once a man who stood for justice." He stepped down the 3 porch steps into the shadows of the yard, where the moonlight caught the silver in his hair, like ashes from an old life. Far off, the torches moved closer. The sound of hooves pounded like war drums. Naelli stood at the door, hands gripping the frame, her heart hammering. Rhett loaded another round, raised his head, his eyes calm, unnaturally calm. "Tonight," he whispered, "if they want my life, they'll pay with a whole crew. My friend, there are men who seek no glory, men who live quietly in the wild, carrying only calloused hands and a heart torn apart by life's storms. But when fate throws a fragile soul into their care, they stand tall like mountains, not for reward, but because in the heart of darkness, they still choose what's right. That is the true strength of the Wild West." I tell stories about men who chose honor over survival, about moments when ordinary people stood against impossible odds. This channel is where the Wild West comes alive, not through legends, but through the choices that defined who people really were. 5 takeaway points. Point 1. Justice doesn't wait for permission. Rhett rode into Cedar Hollow with a corpse tied to his saddle, demanding an investigation into the massacre of Naelli's tribe. The sheriff laughed. The marshal told him to forget it. The law in that town didn't serve justice, it served Barrett Cain. So Rhett left, knowing he'd have to fight alone. Point 2. The smallest act of mercy can rewrite your entire life. Rhett had lived like a ghost for 10 years after losing his wife. Then he found Naelli hanging from a tree, beaten and left to die. He could have ridden past. Instead, he cut her down. That single choice pulled him back into the world and gave him something worth fighting for again. Point 3. Real courage isn't fearlessness. It's standing your ground when you know what's coming. Rhett saw the torches moving down the trail. 8 men, maybe 10, all sent by Cain. Naelli begged him to run. He loaded his Winchester instead. He wasn't unafraid. He just refused to live as a coward one more day. Point 4. The law only protects you when powerful men allow it. Rhett brought proof of murder to the sheriff and the federal marshal. They both told him to walk away. In Cedar Hollow, Barrett Cain's money bought silence. The badges meant nothing. Rhett learned the hard way that sometimes justice exists outside the law or not at all. Point 5. Loyalty isn't about blood or tribe. It's about who you choose to protect. Naelli wasn't Rhett's kin. Naelli wasn't Rhett's kin. She wasn't even from his world. But when Cain's men came hunting, Rhett hid here in his cellar, killed 3 of them, and prepared to die defending her. He told her she needed to live, so the world would know one man stood for what was right. I truly hope you find happiness and peace always. I love you. My dear audience of Wild West storytelling, tell me what you felt about this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 8 if you're truly waiting for the next part of this tale. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more thrilling stories from the Wild West.